The moment Maren threw her drink at the man in the gray suit, she was certain she had done the right thing. She was less certain about that the next morning, when he walked into the boardroom as the company's new managing director. But that came later. It started with a phone call. "Maren, it's Mom." Her mother's voice carried that particular tone, equal parts warmth and quiet accusation, that Maren had learned to brace for before the second sentence arrived. "Are you coming home for Dad's retirement dinner next Saturday?" "Of course I am. And you'll bring someone this time." Maren pressed her thumb and forefinger against the bridge of her nose. She was standing in the elevator of her office building in downtown Calgary, watching the numbers climb, already running 4 minutes late for a client meeting. "Mom, your Aunt Deb keeps asking. She means well. Aunt Deb has never meant well a single day in her life, Maren." A pause. The particular pause that preceded a life lesson. "You're 31. I was already married with you and your brother by the time I was your age. You've mentioned that. I just want you to be happy. I am happy." "You know what I mean." Maren did know what she meant. Her mother meant the same thing she'd meant every time they'd had this conversation for the past 4 years. That happiness had a specific shape, and it required another person to complete it. Maren had a different view. She had her own apartment on the 14th floor of a building she'd chosen herself. A career in corporate law she'd worked 12-hour days to build, and a very clear idea of what her life looked like without anyone rearranging it. She'd watched too many of her friends disappear into relationships that quietly hollowed them out. Her colleague Petra had spent 6 months rearranging her entire schedule around a man who ultimately relocated to Vancouver without telling her. Her cousin had cried through her own bridal shower. Maren had taken careful notes. "I'll be there Saturday," she said as the elevator opened, with or without a +1. Her mother sighed in a way that was nearly theatrical. "Just think about it." "Goodbye, Mom." She ended the call and walked into the meeting 2 minutes late, which her client graciously pretended not to notice. Maren was a senior associate at Alderton Callaway, one of Calgary's more established commercial law firms. She had been there 6 years, long enough to understand the firm's rhythms, its politics, its particular brand of quiet ambition dressed up as collegiality. She was good at her job, thorough, precise, hard to rattle. She took on the files nobody wanted and made them work. She had been up for a partnership review the previous spring and been told, politely, that the timing wasn't quite right. She had smiled and said she understood, then gone home and reorganized her files for 3 hours. Her closest friend at the firm was a woman named Celeste, who had joined the same year and shared her particular attitude toward office culture. Observe everything, comment selectively, trust no one who used the phrase, "We're like a family here." Celeste was also the reason Maren was at the Pemberton Club the night everything changed. "It's the summer associate's send-off," Celeste said, appearing at Maren's desk at 5:45 with her coat already on. "You have to come. It looks bad if the senior associates don't show." "It looks bad to whom?" "To everyone. To the articling students. To the partners." Celeste leaned against the desk. "To me personally. Come, one drink. You can leave by 8. Maren came. The Pemberton Club was the kind of bar that looked like a library, all dark wood and leather and low lighting. The sort of place where the drinks were expensive, and the conversations were conducted at a volume that suggested everyone present had something to protect. The firm had booked out the back room. By the time Maren arrived, it was already crowded and warm, full of people she recognized and conversations she'd had before. She got a glass of sparkling water, found a spot near the edge of the room, and watched. She was halfway through her second drink. She had upgraded to wine after the first 30 minutes, when she noticed the man in the gray suit. He was standing near the far end of the bar, talking to one of the junior associates, a second-year named Quinn who had been at the firm for less than a year. Maren didn't know him. He wasn't from their office, which was unusual. These events were typically internal. What she noticed, what registered first, was something in Quinn's posture, the way she kept angling her body slightly away, the way she looked down instead of making eye contact, laughing at the right moments but too quickly, too carefully. Maren set her glass down. She had been Quinn 2 years into her career. She knew exactly what that posture meant. She moved across the room, inserting herself between them with the particular ease of someone who had spent 6 years navigating rooms like this one. "Quinn," she said brightly, resting a hand briefly on her arm. "Can I borrow you for 1 second? There's someone I want you to meet." She looked at the man. "Sorry to interrupt." He looked at her with something between surprise and amusement. "No trouble," he said. Maren steered Quinn toward the other side of the room, and once they were clear, Quinn let out a short, quiet breath. "Thank you," she said. I wasn't sure how to." You don't have to explain anything, Maren said. Are you all right? Yes, I'm fine. Thank you. They stood together for a few minutes. Maren made sure Quinn was absorbed into another conversation before she turned around, intending to collect her coat and head home. Instead, she walked directly into the man in the gray suit, who had apparently followed them across the room. Her wine glass tilted. She grabbed for it. She missed. The entire contents of the glass emptied across the front of his jacket. For a half-second, the nearby conversations went quiet. He looked down at his jacket, then at her. I was coming to apologize, he said, which was not what she had expected him to say. For earlier, I realize I may have made your colleague uncomfortable. Maren stared at him. His expression was entirely unreadable. She wasn't sure whether he was being sincere or constructing a very plausible-sounding defense. That was an accident, she said, gesturing at the wine. The drink, I assumed. What you were doing with Quinn was not something I'm going to apologize for. I wasn't asking you to. He pulled a folded pocket square from his jacket and pressed it to the lapel with a resigned sort of patience. I'll let you get back to your evening. He walked away. Maren stood there for a moment, unsure why the interaction felt unfinished. She left at 8:15, as planned. On the way home, she told herself it was done. She told herself that on the entire drive, and again while she was getting ready for bed, and once more when she turned off the light. The next morning, Alderton Calloway held a firm-wide meeting to introduce the new managing director, recently arrived from the Toronto office, brought in to lead the firm's expansion into Alberta's energy sector. His name was Callum. He was wearing a different gray suit. When he walked to the front of the room and Maren saw his face, her mind went completely still for several seconds. Then it resumed, but louder. He recognized her in approximately the same moment. Something shifted in his expression, careful, controlled, but there, the faintest suggestion of a smile that he did not let become one. Maren did not move. She was standing toward the back of the conference room with Celeste, and she was exceptionally grateful for the 40 or so colleagues between them. Do you know him? Celeste murmured. No, Maren said. I've never seen him before in my life. Callum spoke for about 12 minutes. He was good at it, clear, direct, not given to the kind of grandiose vision statement language that tended to fill these introductions. He talked about the firm's direction, about what the next 2 years would require, about what he was looking for from the teams he'd be working with. He did not look at Maren more than twice, both times briefly. Both times in the same pleasant, impersonal way he looked at everyone. She spent the rest of the morning waiting for something to happen. An email, a call to HR, a note from his assistant asking her to come upstairs. Nothing came. By afternoon, she had convinced herself she was overreacting. He was a senior partner from the Toronto office. He came to an industry event. Someone made him uncomfortable. He received a glass of wine to the chest, and now he was her managing director. It was a coincidence, uncomfortable but manageable. These things happened. By the end of the week, she was less convinced. He had a habit of being exactly where she was. The kitchen at 8 in the morning, the elevator at 5:15. He would nod, say something brief and professional, a question about a file she was working on, a comment about the weather, once a remark about a case that had been in the news, and then he would leave, and Maren would spend the next 10 minutes irritably replaying the conversation, trying to figure out if it meant anything. You're being paranoid, Celeste told her, when she described this on a Thursday afternoon over bad coffee in the break room. He specifically asked about the Hendricks file. That file isn't even in his portfolio. Maybe he was making conversation. Why would he make conversation with me? Celeste gave her a look. Maren, you're a very intelligent woman who is currently failing to answer a very simple question. I poured wine on him. People have started relationships for less. I thought he was. Maren stopped. The situation with Quinn was not what it looked like. I overreacted. Did you? Maren thought about it. Quinn had thanked her. But Quinn had also been new, and new people were sometimes nervous, and a man talking closely to you at a loud bar wasn't necessarily. She hadn't actually given him a chance to explain before she'd removed Quinn from the situation. He had come after them, apparently to apologize, and he was apologizing, she said slowly. When I spilled the drink. That changes nothing about the current situation. Maren, he likes you. Maren drank her coffee. That's a very reductive interpretation. It's also the correct one. 3 weeks into Callum's tenure, the firm submitted a major bid for the legal representation of a Northern Alberta energy consortium. It was a significant file, one that, if successful, would reshape the firm's practice for the next several years. Callum assembled a working team, and when the list went out, Maren's name was on it. Celeste texted her a single emoji. Maren did not respond. The working group met twice a week in the third-floor boardroom, and for the first time, Maren had to sit across a table from Callum and actually engage with him as a professional. It was, she found, significantly easier than the hallway encounters. He was sharp, thorough, and direct, in a way that she respected against her better judgment. He pushed back when something wasn't right, but without the kind of performance that some partners used to remind everyone of their rank. He asked good questions. He listened to the answers. After the second meeting, he fell into step beside her in the hall. "The analysis you did on the liability structure was useful," he said. "I'd like to see it expanded before we go back to the client. I can have something by Friday. Thursday would be better. Thursday then." They walked in silence for a moment. "For what it's worth," he said, "what you did for Quinn that night, the instinct behind it, that was right. The situation was ambiguous and she was new, and you made a judgment call. I don't hold it against you." Maren kept walking. "You don't have to say that, I know I don't." She looked at him sideways. He was looking straight ahead, expression neutral. "Quinn told me the same thing," she said finally. "That you were fine. That she was just nervous. She was nervous. I'd heard about her work and I was being enthusiastic about it. And I didn't realize until too late that I'd been hovering." A pause. "It's something I've been told before, hovering." "Apparently." Maren said nothing. Something in her chest shifted almost imperceptibly, the way ice does just before it breaks. "The analysis will be on your desk Thursday morning," she said. "Thank you." She did not tell Celeste about the conversation, but she thought about it for 3 days. The consortium bid was awarded to Alderton Callaway in mid-September. The team had worked late for most of the preceding 2 weeks, and when the call came through on a Wednesday afternoon, the third-floor boardroom briefly became the loudest room in the building. Callum shook everyone's hand, said something to each person that was specific and genuine, and when he got to Maren, he said quietly, "That liability analysis held up under 2 rounds of scrutiny. You should be proud of it." She told herself the warmth she felt was professional satisfaction. She was mostly convincing. The celebration dinner was at a restaurant in Inglewood, the whole working group plus a few senior partners, and somewhere between the appetizers and the main course, the conversation loosened into the kind of talk that's easier with wine and a concrete win behind you. Maren found herself seated near the middle of the table, which was unusual. She typically maneuvered toward the ends, where there was more space to breathe. She was between one of the junior associates and, as the seating arranged itself, Callum. She kept expecting it to be awkward. It wasn't. They talked about the file, about the next phase, about a decision that would need to be made before the end of the month. And then at some point the conversation shifted. The way conversations do. And he asked her something about growing up in Alberta, and she told him something true about her parents' house in Lethbridge. And he told her something about learning to navigate Toronto winters. After spending his childhood in Nova Scotia, and somewhere in all of it she forgot for a while to be guarded. She remembered on the walk out. The October air off the Bow River was sharp and cold, and as the group dispersed toward their cars and cabs, he walked beside her toward the parking lot without making a point of it. "I grew up hating winters," she said, which was not something she had intended to say out loud. "And now? Now I've accepted them. There's a difference." He smiled at that. A real one, not the polished professional version. And for a moment under the parking lot lights, he looked like a completely different person. Or maybe just more like himself. She wasn't sure which. "Maren." He stopped walking. She stopped too. "I'd like to take you to dinner. Not with the team. Just the 2 of us." She looked at him for a long moment. "You're the managing director. I'm aware. That's not an uncomplicated situation. Also aware, and you're asking anyway." "I am." He didn't look away. "You don't have to say yes. But I thought you deserved a straightforward question, instead of however many more weeks of accidentally running into each other in the kitchen." Something she'd been holding for several weeks released, all at once, and she had to work to keep her expression neutral. "I knew you were doing that deliberately." He looked entirely unrepentant. "Thursday is apparently my day." She looked at him for another moment. "Saturday," she said, "and somewhere I choose." He nodded. "Saturday," she told Celeste the next morning. Celeste said finally with the specific exhaustion of someone who has been waiting for news for a very long time. He picked her up at 7 on Saturday. She took him to a Japanese restaurant on 17th Avenue that she'd been going to alone for 3 years. Small, quiet, the kind of place where they knew her order, and watching him in that particular context, out of the suit and out of the office, she decided she liked him. Not in the careful provisional way she'd been approaching the idea, but actually, the way you like someone when you've stopped looking for reasons not to. They talked for 2 hours after the food was cleared. He told her about the years after his first serious relationship ended, how he'd buried himself in the work so completely that he'd missed large portions of his own life without noticing until he was on the other side of it. She told him, and she wasn't sure why she told him, except that he listened the way very few people listen, about her years of deliberate singlehood, the wall she'd built so carefully and called a choice. He didn't try to reframe it. He just nodded and said, "I understand that. I lived a version of it too." That was the moment she knew. Not the fireworks version. She'd never trusted that. The quiet version. The kind that feels like recognizing something. She thought about calling her mother on the way home and decided to wait until there was more to say. She wasn't ready to share this yet. It still felt like something she was holding carefully in both hands. What she didn't know, and wouldn't know for several more weeks, was that Celeste was not the only one paying attention. Her name was Ingrid, and she had been at the firm for 3 years. 2 of them spent rotating through various departments before settling in Callum's predecessor's administrative orbit. She was efficient, pleasant, and privately furious in a way that moved beneath the surface of everything she did. She had spent a significant portion of the past year positioning herself for the moment the new managing director arrived. The dinners she'd heard about, the files she'd flagged, the conversations she'd arranged. She had known about Callum's appointment 3 weeks before it was announced, a piece of information she had obtained through careful management of the right relationships. Then he arrived, and his attention went directly to the consortium file, and through the consortium file, to Maren. Ingrid watched this happen with the particular focused patience of someone rerouting. She began with small things, a comment here, a question there. She befriended one of the junior associates, who sometimes worked late with Maren, a young man named. She made a point to remember his name. Oliver, who was green enough and lonely enough to talk when someone showed interest. Through Oliver, she learned about Maren's working habits, her history at the firm, the partnership review that hadn't come through. Through other channels, she gathered what she needed to construct a picture that was accurate in its components and completely distorted in its framing. By the time she was done, she had built, from true pieces, a portrait of Maren as someone who used professional proximity strategically, who had made a calculated decision to attach herself to the new managing director as a means of securing the advancement she'd been passed over for. It was the sort of story that couldn't be disproved from the outside, because every factual element of it was real. The partnership review, the consortium file, the dinner. She brought it to 2 of the senior partners, separately, framing it each time as concern. As someone who cared about the firm's culture, she was very good at the concerned voice. Maren became aware of it gradually, the way you become aware of a change in weather. First a shift in temperature, then something in the light, and finally you look up and realize the sky has changed. She noticed that one of the senior partners seemed cooler than usual, that a meeting she'd expected to be included in came and went without her name, that Oliver suddenly couldn't make eye contact when they passed in the hall. She didn't connect it to Ingrid. She connected it to herself, to Callum, and she spent a hard weekend convincing herself she should end things before they went further. She was sitting at her kitchen table on a Sunday evening with her tea going cold, rehearsing what she would say when her phone rang. It was Callum. "I need to tell you something," he said. "Someone has been talking to the senior partners about you. I want you to hear it from me directly." Maren set down her mug. "What did they say?" he told her. She listened. The story as he relayed it was recognizable enough in its pieces that it took her a moment to hear how it had been assembled. When she did, something went cold and then very still in her. "Who told them this?" A pause. "I don't know yet, but I'm going to find out." She almost said, "It doesn't matter, let it go, I'll handle it." Instead she said, "I believe you." She wasn't sure why she said it. She was almost always sure of what she was saying. It came out and she meant it, and she heard what it cost her to mean it, and she decided to let it cost her. It took Callum 10 days to trace it back to Ingrid. He did it methodically, following the chain of conversations backward until Oliver, who was not a bad person, broke down in Callum's office and apologized for 20 minutes. Callum listened, thanked him, and let him go. Then he called a meeting. What happened after that was not dramatic in the way films made it look. There was a formal HR process. There were several closed-door conversations. There was a week where Maren was not sure what was going to happen, and she went to work every day and did her job, and did not talk about it beyond the few people who needed to know. Her mother called on a Thursday night, the way her mother always knew. And Maren found herself saying, more than she had intended, that she was having a difficult week. Her mother was quiet for a moment and then said, with none of the usual pressure in it, "Do you have someone to help you through it?" And Maren, to her own surprise, said yes. Ingrid's contract was not renewed. She left the firm on a Friday afternoon with a box and a very controlled expression, and Maren was not there to see it, having taken the afternoon to go home early for the first time in recent memory. She called Callum from her couch at 4 o'clock. "Are you all right?" he asked. "I don't know yet," she said. "I think I will be. That's enough." She looked at the ceiling of her apartment, the one she had chosen herself. "I owe you an apology," she said, "for the drink. At the bar. I never actually said I was sorry." A long pause. She could hear him breathing, which meant he was thinking. "You were protecting someone," he said. "You didn't know enough to do it differently. I understood that then. Still, I'm saying it now accepted." Another pause, warmer. "For what it's worth, it's a story I plan to tell for a very long time." She laughed, which she hadn't expected to do. "It was a really good jacket. It was an excellent jacket. I'm still not over it. Callum." "Yes, come over for dinner. I'll cook." She heard him smile. "What time?" 3 months later, she brought him home to Lethbridge for her father's belated retirement celebration. It had been rescheduled twice, the family way, and her mother opened the door, looked at Callum for approximately 4 seconds, and turned to Maren with an expression that said everything she had the grace not to say out loud. Her father shook his hand for a long time. Her Aunt Deb asked him how he took his tea, before she had even introduced him properly. That evening, after dinner, Maren stood at the kitchen sink rinsing dishes while her mother dried, and her mother said, in the quiet, ordinary voice she used for things that mattered, "He's a good man." Maren looked out the window at the backyard, the garden her parents had kept for 30 years, the light going golden over the October grass. "Yeah," she said, "I think he is." Her mother touched her shoulder briefly. That was all. It was enough. Later that night, driving back through the dark prairie toward Calgary, Callum's hand resting on the gear shift near hers, Maren thought about all the years she had built her life around the certainty that she didn't need this. She had been so sure. She had made it a point of pride. And she hadn't been entirely wrong either. She could have kept going, kept doing well, kept being enough for herself. She knew that now in a way she hadn't when she was building all those walls. But there was a difference between capable and full, and sitting in the quiet dark of a car in November, prairie sky enormous above them, she knew which one she was. She turned her hand over and slipped her fingers through his. He didn't say anything. He didn't need to.